Hello, and welcome to Understanding Cryptocurrency and Blockchain, a gentle introduction. My name is Praveen Krishnan. This is a 45-minute talk that I did at a cryptocurrency gathering in San Francisco in late October 2017. It's intended for people who have heard about Bitcoin and blockchain, are interested, but haven't really had the time to dig into it and who really want to just understand the basics. So you don't need any technical knowledge to understand this presentation, hopefully, and it should be fairly high level. So what I'd like to do here is to explain some of the core concepts behind blockchain and cryptocurrency, and then hopefully weave it all together in a way that is easily understood. So as I said, I'll stay at a fairly high level, but but there will be some areas where I'll dive into it a little more deeply because I really think those areas will need a little more attention, and it's good for you to know the details. I've pulled from various sources, so all credit is due to the original authors, and I'll list some of them at the end. Last but not the least, I make reference to a few commercial products. Just remember that I don't endorse or recommend any of those products. Okay, so what we'll do here is we'll go through this presentation in 5 chapters. So in the first chapter, we'll get into a little bit about why there's money and basics around money, and then talk through what could be a better system, and then get into the details around identity and security in blockchain, and then finally we'll talk about how you can actually use Bitcoin and blockchain today. Okay, so most of the time, if you've heard of blockchain or Bitcoin, you've usually heard those two terms in the same sentence. So first off, let's separate the terms. Bitcoin is an application and blockchain is a protocol. Now this is not very unlike how Angry Birds is an application and Android is the platform, right? Or for that matter, Gmail, right? Gmail is an application, and then HTTP is the protocol on top of which Gmail runs, right? So it's important to keep these two things in mind, right? One is an application, the other is a protocol. Now there are several flavors of protocols and applications, right? There's various kinds of blockchains, and there's various kinds of applications that run on those protocols. So Bitcoin is one, then there's Ethereum, there's Ripple, and there's a whole bunch of coins which are essentially applications that run on blockchain. Okay, so just keep this in mind because as we go through this presentation, I'll use the term Bitcoin and blockchain somewhat interchangeably, even though they're very different things. Okay, with that, let's get into the chapter 1. So let's start with money. The reason we start right here is because it brings up a couple of core concepts underlying blockchain and cryptocurrency. So let's get to the basics. Okay, so where did money come from? Most historians would agree that barter was the original way of doing commerce, right? Barter is simply an exchange of goods. So let's take a fictitious village sometime back in the day, and there's a fisherman in the village and there's a blacksmith. The fisherman wants knives, he has fish to give, and the blacksmith wants fish to eat and he has knives to give. So this is perfect, right? So they exchange goods and they're happy. So barter works great. Now, a new villager comes into the picture, and we can see that the barter system doesn't quite work very well. Okay, there's a problem with barter. Actually, there are several problems with barter, right? So now let's take this situation. Sometime down the road, now the blacksmith needs medicines and he has knives to give. He probably needs medicines because he had bad fish. The medicine man, unfortunately, doesn't want knives. He wants vegetables. And the fisherman still wants knives and he has fish to give, but there's nobody wanting his fish. So trading breaks down. And what happens when trading breaks down? Now the fisherman has to go make his own knives, right? So that means he's not fishing as much. Same with the blacksmith. He has to go make his own medicine because no one's giving him medicine. So as a result, people are doing things that they're not specialists at, right? So specialization comes down. And as a result, overall productivity in the village comes down. And therefore, everyone is, poorer. So that's a big problem. Now, luckily, the chief, there's a intelligent chief in the village. Okay. Now, this chief has a brilliant idea. He decides to create a token system. So instead of exchanging goods, a villager can exchange tokens that represents whatever good that they want to exchange, right? So 1 coin for a knife and 2 for a medicine and so on, right? So the token can actually be exchanged for actual goods, right? And then once you have a token, you can exchange that freely with other villagers. And so now what happens is, you know, a, a merchant, or if you're a villager, you can make your own product whenever and however much you want. You don't have to worry about someone not wanting knives or fish. You can always exchange your tokens for the goods that you want, right? Now, this obviously, you can see is the money system that we have today, right? Now, it's all very basic and somewhat logical if you spend some time thinking about it. So, we have an excellent token system idea. Now, how can the chief kick off this token system, right? There's like several questions. I mean, who gets the new tokens, right? The chief has made these tokens now, like who gets them? How are they distributed? How much does each of these villagers get? Right? So there's like a lot of questions that need to get answered. Luckily, the chief, being a really intelligent chief, comes up with an idea, right? So he decides that you must do some useful work for the community, like catching fish or making medicines. And if you can prove that you've done some useful work, you can get a brand new coin, right? So in this case, if you're the blacksmith, proving that you've done some useful work, or rather, your proof of work is providing the knife. Or in the case of a fisherman, it's the fish, right? So you show that you've done some useful work for the community, right? You've done some work that someone else in the community will find valuable, and then you can get a brand new coin from the chief. So this is very important because providing new coins only to people who show proof of work ensures that only people who are producing things of value to someone in the community are able to get the new token, right? This is critical because otherwise the system breaks down. So in this case, let's say if there's a musician in this village, right? Nobody really cares for his music. He just makes crap music. Now he should not be getting tokens because he's not producing any useful work. So remember that. So if you show that you've done useful work, right? If you show proof of work, then you can get a brand new coin. And once you get a brand new coin, you can then exchange it with others in the village. Okay, now this is a very core concept. Let's just keep that in mind. Okay, now there are other things that the chief must do to keep this whole system running, right? The chief now is the central authority, right? Only he can make these coins. Because, if he wasn't the central authority making coins, then anyone in the community will make coins, right? So even people who are not producing useful work for the community can make their own coins and, essentially ruin the system. So the chief has to ensure security. Now the chief also has to keep track of all these transactions because you don't want villagers trying to cheat others because people will do that. So the chief has to be a bookkeeper, right? He has to keep a ledger where he tracks how much coins are being exchanged and who it's going to, and so on. And then in addition to that, he might also offer, to hold other people's coins, right, for security because he happens to have two guards who are good at security. So he now offers a service to hold other people's coins as well. So as a central authority, the chief is providing a useful function in this system. Okay, now I said a central authority has benefits, but as you can imagine, there's also a lot of drawbacks with the central system, right? Now, in an ideal world, the central authority is benevolent, right? If you have a benevolent chief and everything is good. But unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world, so there are problems, right? So, the chief, now that he sees that he's the one in the middle of all these transactions, because he has to keep track of it in a book, he decides, hey, I'm going to take a cut of every transaction going through, right? And so over time, those commissions could be pretty excessive, right? He can also decide to take some money and cut out some people from the system, right? So he could censor the system because he's the central authority. So you can see how there's a lot of parallels with this little hypothetical village that we created and what we have now, right? Obviously, the token system is very, very similar to our monetary system, right? At its core, that's what it is, right? And in our system, we have banks and financial institutions that serve as intermediaries or centralized authorities, right? While they do have benefits, their flaws can have major consequences, right? So, the 2008 crisis is a spectacular example of that, where the intermediaries and the centralized authorities really screwed up the system. So, can we have an efficient system where commerce can happen, everyone gets the coins that they need to get, and do it without all these problems that lie in a central authority?